welcome to Legally Speaking with me, Tarun Nangia. Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, spoke about the danger of deepfakes. If the Prime Minister himself had to raise this issue, we know how dangerous it must be, because what we all know till now is that anybody's face can be put to any kind of communication being done and it will almost seem real in a deepfake. This is what we know, but today we have an expert who understands this much better. So in this two-part series, we'll go into detail with deepfakes. Uh, Let me welcome Advocate Niharika Karanjawala from Karanjawala and Company. Good to see you, Niharika, and looking
Great to see
forward to
that.
this interesting two-part series on deepfakes. So, first come first, share with the viewers what are deepfakes.
Right. So, Tarun, if we understand it most simply, deepfakes are a form of faking videos. You can understand it as a Photoshop for videos where one piece of footage is sort of layered over another to create a new artificial video. Now, the technology per se is nothing terribly new. We've been seeing this in the movies since the mid 90s. In fact, I mean, I'm sure a lot of your viewers will recall in the 94 Tom Hanks movie Forrest Gump, the scene where Tom Hanks's character meets with President Kennedy. That is a faked aspect, of course, because it is a morphed part of it, and they've used old footage of President Kennedy and layered Tom Hanks's footage over it. So the technology itself is nothing terribly new. It's just the manner in which it has expanded and become accessible. Now, deepfakes are mostly formed between deep learning and artificial intelligence, and it's gone from being something restricted to movie magic and movie studios to something that is accessible to nearly anyone who has access to the internet and to a laptop or a cell phone or a tablet or something like that, right? So the proliferation of it and the accessibility of it and the potential malice with which these videos can be made are what really makes this a startling and worrisome thing for the future.
Okay, point well taken. Is this a way to weaponize misinformation?
Absolutely. I think this would be a new frontier of weaponizing misinformation. See, misinformation and disinformation are nothing new in the worlds of politics and propaganda, right? They've been used for decades, used in various different ways, whether it is through statements made in speeches or publishing of pamphlets, things like that. However, this brings in a bit of a paradigm shift because sort of evolutionarily, we are geared towards believing what we see. We believe our own eyes, and if we see something, we will have far less skepticism of it because it registers to us as something we ourselves have witnessed if we see it actually playing out in a video. So when you look at the potential dangers of this, either to an individual in terms of things like revenge porn or things like scam videos, or if you look at it from a propaganda perspective in terms of war propaganda, if you look at it from a political perspective, especially since we're in the run up to an election year, this is especially worrisome, from that context. It can be a very bold new frontier and a very effective frontier of weaponizing misinformation
In
for
fact,
various forms of gain.
two things interesting for the viewer. We'll come to the political bit. You said revenge porn. Now the danger is we have seen women committing suicide when they are threatened with morphed nude images of women. Sometimes earlier this was that when women were raped or some molestation used to happen, videos were to be made. They were sold on CDs, and this been happening for the past 15-20 years. But that was something different. It was an incident-led blackmailing. Here, without the woman even meeting the potential criminal, he can use his picture to make something offensive. And
Absolutely.
in the sense, so do you think that how will state control this? Because this is something which is very dangerous.
Absolutely. I think so, a creation of videos, lewd videos of this sort are already banned. What will and circulation of them, of course. What the real challenge will be is tracking down the origin of these videos. That will be the real challenge because nowadays where information is broadcast in milliseconds and it can go viral in a matter of a few minutes, it can reach millions of people via social media, WhatsApp, things like that. Pinpointing the origins of where something came from and where something was morphed is going to be the hard and difficult part. I think half the battle will be won once society sort of adapts to the notion that just because it has been forwarded to you and you've seen it in a video does not necessarily make it true,
So, but
right? So
does it amount? See, character assassination can be one of the.
absolutely. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It can be used to ruin people's lives. Absolutely, it would be, it would be very, very dangerous. And as you mentioned, things like young women, if you're dealing especially with minors, something like that, the stigma of something like this is enough to bring your entire world down. You know,
Yes.
which is why I think service providers also have to take uh, extreme caution about what kind of imagery is being broadcast via their networks. They have to then throw their might behind finding out where it originated. Then investigators have to go in, and I think very strong penalties will have to be met out to something like this. That being said, it may not necessarily fully combat it, which is why it's important for society to also not jump to snap conclusions about something they see and take into account that it may not necessarily be the truth.
Niharika, could you tell me that when I see a video on my mobile, I believe it? Uh,
Exactly.
what are the potential dangers of deepfakes?
Absolutely. Now, see, like I said, we are sort of evolutionarily trained to believe our eyes, right? It's a hangover of evolutionary biology, and uh, by and large, perception is reality in terms of society. Now, this what we've seen this in a number of instances. It's been borne out not only by studies but also anecdotal evidence, personal experiences. If you remember the first Kennedy Nixon debate, there was one huge signifying factor that impacted Nixon's numbers over Kennedy's. And it was something that Nixon referenced himself later, which was that Nixon was not willing to wear the powder makeup for the debate, and Kennedy was. So, under the harsh lights in the studio, Kennedy came off as being more cool and composed, and Nixon looked as though he was sweating a little, he looked a little pallid, and as a result, it sort of broadcast that notion to the viewers signing in to watch. Now, you take this on a larger scale because getting information is no longer restricted to watching the 6 o'clock news or reading the papers in the morning. We are subject to it 24 hours a day, and in many at the touch of a button on a cell phone, right? So we have to take into account that that is a much more significant danger today. A more recent example I can give you is in the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. Now, there was a huge amount of public backlash towards Amber Heard, starting roughly at the point when she got on the stand. Now, one would remember that the narrative about Johnny Depp and the domestic abuse that subsisted for about 6 years before there was any backlash. He was by and large blacklisted by every major studio. So, what really brought about that change in public perception? There was also another trial before this, not against Amber Heard, but against the Daily, I think against the Sun newspapers in the UK, where he sued them for defamation, and she had also given testimony there. None of that was publicly broadcast. However, as soon as she came to the stand here, there seemed to be something disingenuous about her demeanor and about her narrative. And suddenly, there you saw a huge turning point in public opinion on this story, where a lot of people suddenly turned against her. Now, a lot of people cynically say this is because Johnny Depp is a big star and he's got a lot of fans. But this is coming off a 6 year blacklist. You can't possibly suggest that Johnny Depp had more fans at the end of a 6 year blacklist than he did at the peak of his career when this story initially came out, right? So there is something to that. And it was when I think the greatest victory they won in that case was getting the right to publicly broadcast it, because it suddenly gave the general public this notion of, oh, okay, what I was initially told does not seem to be all the way genuine. I'll give you another example of a case I have been a part of myself, the Arushi Talwar murder case, where we represented her parents, Dr. Rajesh and Nupur Talwar. And very early on in the case, in 2008, Dr. Nupur Talwar had given an interview to NDTV. Now, this was at a time when she was not even considered an accused, by the way, and she was just there as a grieving mother. But there was something about that interview. People thought she was too pulled together, too composed, was not showing adequate enough signs of grief. And despite the fact that the journalist who did the interview later came out and said, no, there was grief. It's just the cameras weren't running at that time. She did cry. She openly cried, of course. And despite the fact that she was acquitted eventually of any and all charges in this case by the Allahabad High Court, I personally know several people who have said no, but I saw that interview and there was something odd there. There was something odd there. So this is the way in which perceptions stick in people's mind following video evidence. We have studies also that show that people tend to make a quicker, more snap decision about innocence versus guilt when they see video footage as opposed to when they hear audio of the same incident. So it's hugely impactful on the human mind, and this is something we can't discount.
Now, tell me one thing that the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, he spoke on the dangers of deepfakes. What are the dangers to the political landscape due to deepfakes?
Absolutely. Now, this is something I think we can all relate to very substantially. We're in the run up to an election year. Supposing right on the eve of elections, and politics in India, personality politics are an important thing in a country like India. We're the world's largest democracy, and equal to issues, I would say what weighs with the people when they go to vote is whether the candidate resonates with them or not. It's not just about the issues in countries like India. In most democracies, actually, it is also significantly about the personality of the candidate standing. Now, imagine on the eve of the election, when campaigning may have been stopped because it's close to the election. You may be in a situation where someone may not be able to really get news out there to clear their name to the general public. Supposing at a time like this, at a crucial time like this, a video is released and goes viral on social media that shows a candidate in some sort of controversial position, either a controversial scandal or a conversation about engaging in corruption, or maybe a video about someone engaging in communal violence themselves. This will have a huge impact on voter turnout and on the election as a whole. And that is not something that any country wants. No country wants their electorate to be subject to that kind of manipulation, where right before uh, an important decision is being made, what is prevalent in the mind is not the issues or the overall values of a candidate, but one scandalous or shocking piece of media, right? That would be it could have potentially disastrous effects on any campaign. It's also a slightly double-edged sword, which is, since, as we were discussing, since technology like this makes it very difficult to trust your senses and very difficult to trust what you see, people can also just fob off genuine videos and genuine evidence against them as being deep fakes. And when it comes to the court of public opinion, it's just a you versus me or a he said she said. So these are significant things that would impact the political sphere, in my opinion.
Uh, Tell me one thing, in the world of news and propaganda, say in the times of war, or when you want to put a certain narrative that okay, this is happening, so a large number of people should believe that this is happening. What are the dangers in them?
Now, misinformation and propaganda has always been something that has massively affected public opinion. We've seen this. We've seen numerous examples in World War II. We've seen numerous examples in almost every war, right? It is a war on the front, but also a war in people's minds. It happens. Now, in these circumstances, we can just look at the conflicts that are currently ongoing. In the Israel Gaza conflict at the moment, there's a lot of, and you see this very commonly on the news, there will be some footage that is released, and then very soon thereafter it will be decried as fake. So it leads one to a position where one is completely unsure of what one can actually believe is happening at the ground level. One also tends to disbelieve the media channels that are giving one information. The University College of Cork, in fact, did a study on the Ukraine Russia war and the use of deepfakes in that conflict. And I think they analyzed tweets from approximately the first 6 months of 2022. And what they found was the use of deepfakes had a significant impact on not only the molding of public opinion, but also the trust that people were able to place in their news agencies. And see, now I'm not suggesting for a moment that intelligence agencies will be swayed by a deepfake because they'll have access to far superior technology and training in cyber forensics and things like that. I don't think they themselves will be swayed. But when the force of public opinion is very strongly with or against something, the leadership of that country where that public opinion is strong often tends to follow the cry of public opinion, right? It can't, a politician who doesn't follow majoritarian opinion is not likely to be a politician in power for very much longer. So it's a very significant thing. It's a very significant thing because it formulates how a country as a whole will think of a particular conflict, what pressure they will put upon their own leaders, whether they are involved with that conflict or not, to side with one side or another. And, especially since we are in this situation, we're talking about conflicts that involve what is widely believed to be potential nuclear powers. These are things that involve all of us in a world effort, and world leaders from everywhere weigh in on these things. So it is definitely a worrying aspect.
Could you share with us the impact on evidence? Basically, evidence is very important for, say, conviction in a murder crime, a rape crime, a robbery crime,
Absolutely.
theft, uh, numerous things actually. It could be
Absolutely.
domestic violence in a house, anything.
It could be any of it. Yeah.
So, with regards to court proceedings and also image in front of the police as the crime unravels itself, could you, as a lawyer, also share that with us?
Absolutely. So this is one thing, being a criminal lawyer, as you know, that I am most concerned with and I am most interested by. Now, like I said, because investigative agencies, intelligence agencies, they will have access to a lot of superior technology. And by and large, by the time a trial rolls around, all evidence that is going to be presented to the court is subjected to forensic testing, right? So anything that is fake, at least one would hope, will be weeded out by the time it actually gets to the court to be considered admissible or inadmissible in evidence. The real danger, I believe, to the trials and the system of justice before that is what happens in the investigative stage. Because footage of this sort, faked footage of this nature, when available to investigators during the stage of investigation, can have a massive impact on the rights of the accused. First of all, it can be used for things like scuttling bail. If investigators say that they have very significant, weighty evidence that the crime was in fact caught on camera, and as such, they have a lot of substantial evidence linking the person and they feel that they might run or something, it would build up a very strong case for them to demand no grant of bail for the accused. Now, as we've also discussed before, especially in certain cases regarding bail, we've seen this predominantly in a lot of PMLA cases and things like that, but also in crimes of other natures. The investigative agencies often take a very adversarial role to the accused, because the role of an investigative agency is to come to what the truth is and present to the court the best possible evidence that they have to support their case. The role of the investigative agency is not to convict an accused at any and all costs, right? But sometimes, unfortunately, that is how it practically winds up working in the court system. So, we'll have to have a situation where both investigative agencies as well as the courts who look at this type of evidence exercise a certain amount of skepticism and don't take everything at absolute face value. Like, speaking of the adversarial aspect, another matter that I had the privilege to work on recently, the Aryan Khan bail matter. Now, in that case, where eventually the boy was not even charge sheeted because there was absolutely no evidence against him, and he was, in point of fact, not carrying anything when he was found and arrested. Despite that, in a case of that nature, just based off of WhatsApp messages that had been sent a couple of years previous, when he was living abroad in a country where marijuana was perfectly legal for recreational uses, his bail was scuttled for approximately 6 months. They made it seem as though he had international linkages. They made it sound like he was some kind of drug dealer, very unfairly. And so a 23-year-old boy spent a month wrongly in custody, right? So now, I mean, when you have investigative agencies coming at you with that perspective, there is a lot of potential danger there. So the investigative agencies, while I totally don't believe in crippling investigators' ability to put their case forward and to investigate, I totally don't believe in crippling their investigative abilities. However, there has to be some sort of understanding where, if they feel that there might be something amiss about a certain type of evidence, they don't press it in a manner that lacks integrity, and they don't press it in a manner that can be unfairly used against the accused merely because it can be unfairly used against the accused, right? And secondly, I feel that the courts also need a healthy dollop of skepticism when they are analyzing these things, because unfortunately it's not just a question of if it exists, surely it's true anymore, right? We have to put it at a much higher stake even when we're considering it early on in the investigation for bail or in order to formulate how the investigation proceeds. Now, another aspect is the general public's opinion, because sometimes even if evidence is not used, very often you have informational leaks that get to the press. And I mean, this is a very common by the book thing. Most of us know what is going on by and large in an investigation as it's continuing, right? So now if things get leaked to the press that then resonate with the general public, these are impressions that don't eventually go away at any point, right? Like, I mean, coming back to the Talwar matter again, there was a lot of public outrage and skepticism exercised against Dr. Rajesh and Nupur Talwar for certain rumors that were started in the press in the very, very early days of the case that were ruled out very early as well. But it doesn't. But I mean, the impact of the rumor versus the impact of the ruling out is not equal by any means, right? So,
I
for example, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, you please complete then.
So there were some salacious rumors. For example, there were these notions of, oh, she wasn't actually the biological child, and that's why they didn't treat her well. They didn't treat her as an equal. There were also these rumors of, oh, they had this kind of scandalous alternative lifestyle, so they weren't even in the house when it happened. Now, while this stuff was ruled out very early, it still lingered in the public's mind. Like, in fact, there was one.
You try to
There was
you try
yeah.
to character assassinate again.
Exactly. There was one headline that stuck in my mind, in fact, back from 2008 when Dr. Talwar was initially arrested and then released. There was a newspaper headline that read Dr. Doom and his House of Horrors. Now, how do you expect to get any sort of fair treatment ever? And this is back in 2008 when the investigation was in its absolute infancy. When you're When to the general public, you're Dr. Doom and you're running a House of Horrors, right? How can things ever be fair, quick? So
Now
that
let
it's
us
very
move.
impactful.
Let's move to the potential solutions and the way forward. Any suggestions or observations you have?
Right. So, one thing, if you recall, that we were discussing earlier was, is there any way in which you or I, as laymen, can see, can make out whether things are deep fakes? I thought that was a really interesting suggestion.
Yes.
I'd have to say on that, by and large, no, because, unless we are just scrutinizing everything we are watching, I don't think we'd be able to catch it. Also, it heavily depends on things like sizes of screens, as we've discussed. If we're watching something on a phone screen, it's much there's a much higher possibility that you're actually going to miss something, and especially since the uh, incongruence that a deepfake brings is so subtle and so minute that it's very difficult to catch on. Like, one of the issues is, for example, the eyes have a certain incongruence. There's something off about eye movement. Then in the oral cavity, the tongue and the teeth, they can't be terribly convincingly reproduced. So sometimes there's an incongruence there.
But
Often
you're
there's an
right, in a
incongruence.
mobile phone, you can never make it.
It's impossible. Also, there's an incongruence between proportionality between heads and bodies sometimes, because when something is superimposed upon another thing, usually only the head is superimposed, not the entirety of the image, right? So these are very minute things, and I don't think you and I, as laymen, even if we were making an effort, I don't think we could legitimately catch on to every one of these possible things, right? So it's very difficult on how it goes forward. Now, I think solutions in terms of how it goes forward have to be split into societal solutions, uh, solutions by investigative agencies and media houses, and solutions also cautions by generally imposed by uh, role models and things like that. Now, on the first point, which is cautions to the general public, just the notion of you can't trust all the information that's sent to you on WhatsApp or that you see maybe even on the news. The fact that role models and highly influential figures like the Honorable Prime Minister, like Mr. Amitabh Bachchan, have been speaking out on these, this resonates hugely with the general public, because for the common man in India, the notion that you can fake a video in a thoroughly convincing way is something beyond most belief, right? Like, we have looked into it, we have some understanding of the technology, and therefore we understand how it works. However, for the common man to believe that is a bit of a tall order. But when you have very influential individuals like Mr. Bachchan, like Prime Minister Modi, when you have them speaking out, it resonates with the people. So I think that will need to be done on a much larger scale, especially since in the run up to an election year, I think it is in the interest of all political parties and all politicians to make it clear that this is dangerous information and this can be done. So radio campaigns, things in newspapers, things made in statements on television, I think
One
that would.
one
Yeah, sorry, go
final
ahead.
question I want to know from you. You
Yeah.
think technology will present us with, say, a mobile app or something which, when we get a mobile video forward on the WhatsApp or any other medium messaging communication, I can make out that okay, this video has been manipulated, so that I don't believe it. That do you think that technology can catch up to such levels where?
I absolutely think it can. Technology is ever changing. So, this is almost definitely just a transient aspect in our future, right? I would say in the next 10 years, it'll be very easily determinable via app and via smartphone. I think, in fact, most apps, most social media apps and whatnot will have some kind of technology baked into them to show it. So, I think it is very, very likely that in the next 10 years, we'll have a situation where this does not prove as much of an issue as it will for the next potentially few years. That being said, we don't know where technology will further take us. So 10 years from now, we don't know what problems we might be facing that we'll still say need to be combated. However, I strongly believe, and I'm very hopeful for the fact that technology eventually comes up with solutions to any problems that it creates. So I'm very, very hopeful on that front.
You remain hopeful, but we have to be, as you said, be very, very careful, curious, and in a sense, we should also inform people not to believe what they see with immediacy. We will discuss some more in part 2 when we record on this show. But this has been a really interesting conversation with you on an issue which is of public importance. And needless to say, the Prime Minister of India himself had to highlight it, which means he wanted all 146 crore Indians to know that this is not a simple problem we face as society, it is a big problem. Appreciate your joining us. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Tarun.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.